I was asked about some of the books that I've been using for my research for the Sublime, and there are quite a few. Well, one of the books that I used quite a lot is an autobiography of the writer Vladimir Nabokov, the man who wrote Lolita. He wrote an autobiography called Speak Memory, which I used very heavily for a chapter I did on childhood. I've read that book many years ago. It's not an easy book because he has a strange style, but I found that very helpful. I've been reading a lot of Aldous Huxley, obviously, because he fits very well with the idea of the sublime. His book, The Doors of Perception, which also has a couple other essays in it, have been very influential. He has some concepts there that I've used a lot. The one book that I really loved, some people will find it insanely boring, but I thought it was fantastic, is this book called The Greene. The author's name escapes me right now. He wrote it in the 60s, and it's about his obsession with this one bird, or there might have been two birds, and how he followed them every day for months and literally kind of became one of the birds. It's probably the greatest book about an animal I think ever written, and some people are just incredible fans of it. Some people don't like it, but that book was very important to me. There were some books about birds that were really interesting. You might find them frivolous, but this one book called Mozart's Starling, the woman who wrote it, his name is Leanda Lynn Haupt. Really interesting book about her relationship with this one bird that she adopted and its history and everything. I found it absolutely fascinating. I also read that book, An Immense World, which came out recently by Ed Yong, which is very popular, and that was an excellent book. I didn't use it as much as some of these others. I've been reading a lot of one of my favorite philosophers of all for this book, Roberto Calasso, an Italian writer who died very recently. Not a very well-known writer, at least here in the States, although he has a very rabid following of the few who like him. He's absolutely one of my favorite contemporary, if you can call him contemporary because he just died, writers of all. He had a book called The Ruin of Kosh, which I used heavily in the 48 Laws of Power, but I'm using his book, Gods and Literature, for this book. He had a book called The Marriage of Cadmus and Harmony. He writes a lot about Greek mythology, and I use a lot of Greek mythology in this new book on the Sublime. He also had a book called The Celestial Hunter. Any of his books that deal with history and with ancient philosophies are absolutely brilliant, and I'm using quite a bit. So those would be some of my recommendations. I could go on for hours and years and decades describing all the books I'm reading for this, because there's a lot, but you know, I'll include them in some future reference. That's all for now.